It was 1852, and the tenuous strands of the Compromise of 1850 were barely holding the nation together. Franklin Pierce appeared to be the perfect feel-good candidate. He was a Northern Democrat with strong ties to the South. Voters in both regions thought Pierce would bring balance and peace to the nation.
He was known by everybody, everybody knew him, everybody liked him. That's how he got nominated to begin with. There wasn't anybody who didn't like him.
Number 14, Franklin Pierce, Democrat, 1853 to 1857, 48 years old, from New Hampshire. Franklin Pierce was practically handed the presidency because he was offensive to no one. He would leave office reviled by all.
Pierce had terrible timing throughout his life. Even his timing of when he got elected president was poor. Everybody called him Handsome Frank. The word that was used often in describing him was elegant. Extremely outgoing, very charismatic. Even people who didn't like him felt he was a wonderfully charming, interesting person.
Pierce was well known as a man about town, a social and political butterfly of sorts with a penchant for drinking, often to excess.
Being involved in politics meant being in taverns, meant slapping people on the back, buying them a drink, and the drinking culture in America at this time was enormous. I mean, one scholar has called it the alcoholic republic.
Whether he was an alcoholic is hard to judge today, but he probably was. There were times in his life, however, when he did not drink and when alcohol did not seem to play an important role in his life, and that includes the time he was president.
By all accounts, Pierce managed to stay sober during his presidency. But some believe he was not emotionally stable because of a terrible personal tragedy he suffered just weeks after his election. Pierce, his wife Jane, and their son Benny were in a train wreck. Pierce and his wife were unscathed, but their 11-year-old son was killed.
The top of his head had literally been taken off. Right in front of his parents, Franklin Pierce grabbed his cloak and threw it over Benny's body, hoping that Jane wouldn't see it, but she did, of course, and that was a terrible tragedy to them.
Pierce and his wife had already lost 2 other children to disease. Benny was their last surviving child.
To have your remaining son, the light of your life, Benny, killed in front of your eyes in a train accident, who could imagine the horror that that would instill in anyone?
Added to Pierce's troubles was the death of his vice president, William Rufus King, 6 weeks after the inauguration. And things were about to get worse. Early in 1854, Pierce received a visit from members of his own party, including Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas. Douglas informed Pierce he was sponsoring a bill called the Kansas-Nebraska Act.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act is one of the key moments in all of American political history.
The act was designed to repeal the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which banned slavery in states above the southern border of Missouri. The intent was to let the new territories of Kansas and Nebraska, both north of the boundary, decide for themselves if they wanted slavery or not. Douglas promised to make Pierce's presidency a living nightmare if Pierce didn't support the scheme.
The president should have said, no, you're opening a can of worms, a hornet's nest. But no, Pierce is weak, Pierce can be bullied, and Douglas forces him basically to say, okay, the administration will support this.
And so Pierce basically caved into them. And as a consequence, most of the Northern Democrats in the Senate and exactly half of the Northern Democrats in the House supported the bill, and that was just enough to get it through Congress.
Anti-slavery groups in the North just went berserk over this bill. They went ballistic.
Among the outraged was a little-known politician from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was so angered by the blatant pro-slavery act that he helped create a radical new political party to oppose the expansion of slavery, the Republican Party.
Previously, he talked about slavery now and then, but basically he'd just been a fairly ordinary Whig politician. The Kansas-Nebraska Act brings Lincoln back into politics. And it brings him into politics as a spokesman against the expansion of slavery. It galvanizes Lincoln.
Meanwhile, in the Kansas Territory, anti- and pro-slavery settlers were literally fighting it out. On May 21, 1856, pro-slavery forces burned the abolitionist stronghold of Lawrence, Kansas, down to the ground.
The whole political situation begins to disintegrate, and Pierce is completely incapable of putting it back together again.
Pierce failed to see his role in the deterioration of the Union. He genuinely thought he had a shot at a second term, but even his own party rejected him. Pierce returned home to New Hampshire, his reputation ruined. Several years later, after his wife Jane died, he returned to heavy drinking and lived his remaining years as a recluse, perhaps the saddest legacy of any president.
Presidents are, what can I say, they're victims of whatever happens both during and after their terms. So I think Pierce's reputation will not recuperate anytime soon.
But as tragic as Pierce's presidency had been, it would pale in comparison to his successors.